Hey everyone, and welcome back, focused learners. Today's explainer is going to take us on a journey that is, honestly, just incredible. We're looking at plant reproduction today. But listen, we aren't just going to sit here and list off a bunch of dry botanical terms. No way. We are going to frame this as what it truly is, a highly structured, epic biological quest. I mean, from the initial spark of creation, to surviving a really treacherous journey, facing down a high-stakes gatekeeper, and ultimately securing the entire future of a species, we are literally unlocking the absolute secrets of biological life here. It's going to be awesome, so let's get right into it.
Okay, so here is our quest map for today. We'll start with the anatomy of a flower, then the pollination journey. Third is the double fertilization event. Fourth, we've got post-fertilization, which is all about building seeds. And finally, stage 5, advanced agricultural concepts, where we're going to learn some actual biological cheat codes.
All right, section 1, the anatomy of a flower, or as I like to call it, the character select screen. In this biological adventure, the flower is our grand stage, and it houses both our male and female protagonists.
Let's look at the essential loadout here. On the male side, the main reproductive structure is the stamen. And this is made up of a long stalk called the filament, which holds up the anther. And that anther, that is a vital structure where the actual magic happens. Now, on the female side, functioning as the absolute core of the reproductive system, we have the ovule. And this is safely nestled deep down within a protective structure known as the pistil. These two structures are basically the foundation of our entire story today.
Now enter microsporogenesis. I know, it's a big word, but just frame this in your mind as a newly unlocked skill, or like a crafting phase. Inside that anther we just talked about, there are these distinct protective layers that make up a wall. And these layers work together a lot like a heavily guarded forge. It is right inside this forge that microsporogenesis takes place, carefully crafting and developing our hero for this journey, the pollen grain.
But a hero can't just go out on a treacherous quest without proper gear, right? The pollen grain is actually equipped with highly specialized armor. There's this outer layer called the exine, and it is incredibly tough. It's highly resistant to environmental hazards, basically acting as the pollen's heavy plate armor. And right beneath that is the intine. This is a continuous, much softer inner layer that protects the incredibly vital genetic payload inside. So our pollen grain is completely geared up and ready for literally whatever the world decides to throw at it.
Meanwhile, on the totally opposite side of the map, the female counterpart is going through her own intense level-up sequence. This is called megasporogenesis. It's this beautiful, intricate developmental process where megaspores are formed within the female ovule structure. The ovule is essentially prepping its internal architecture, setting the stage for the crucial encounter that's coming up, so both characters are now fully ready.
Which brings us to section 2, the pollination journey, the treacherous traversal. Our armored pollen grain has to leave the safety of the anther forge and travel all the way to the pistil. But here's the catch. It can't move on its own.
So what route is it actually going to take? Well, there are 3 distinct paths or difficulty levels for our pollen. Autogamy is the simplest route. Pollination happens within the exact same flower. Easy enough. Geitonogamy bumps up the difficulty just a bit. The pollen travels to a different flower, but it's still on the exact same plant. And finally, we have xenogamy. This is the ultimate long-distance traversal. The pollen has to reach a completely different plant altogether. Xenogamy is definitely the hardest route, but it absolutely yields the greatest reward when it comes to genetic diversity.
And to actually make this trek, the pollen relies on a diverse bestiary of allies. We categorize these transport agents into 2 main types. First, we have abiotic factors. These are your non-living environmental elements, like wind and water, which just sort of blindly carry the pollen across vast distances. Then we have biotic factors. These are the living creatures. Insects, for example, act as these unwitting transport vehicles, carrying the pollen directly from one point to another, usually in exchange for just a little bit of nectar.
Moving on to section 3, the double fertilization event, the boss encounter. The pollen has finally landed, but trust me, the quest is far from over. Because think about it, here is a massive biological problem. How does the pistil actually know it's the right pollen? I mean, if the wind is blowing pollen everywhere, a rose pistil might end up covered in oak tree pollen or daisy pollen, right? So how on earth does it know whether to allow fertilization to even happen?
Well, the crucial point here is that the pistil acts as an ultra-strict, unyielding biological gatekeeper. It engages in this incredibly complex chemical dialogue with the pollen grain.
Think of the pistil as a VIP bouncer at a super exclusive club. If the chemical signals don't match up exactly, the pollen is rejected immediately, game over. But if the pollen has the correct chemical passwords, it's deemed compatible, and the gatekeeper actually allows it to proceed, letting it grow a tube right down into the ovule.
And once it's in, the pollen unleashes what is basically a biological multi-hit combo, known as double fertilization. It releases 2 male gametes. Step 1 is syngamy. The first gamete fuses with the egg cell to form the zygote, which is our future plant. Step 2 is triple fusion. The second gamete fuses with 2 polar nuclei to form the primary endosperm nucleus. And these 2 events happen precisely in tandem. The boss has been defeated and the union is a total success.
All right, phase 4, post-fertilization, building seeds. If the boss fight was fertilization, this phase is where we finally gather the post-game loot.
So, following double fertilization, 2 things start growing at the exact same time. The zygote begins its slow, miraculous embryo development into a tiny, rudimentary plant. But it can't survive on its own quite yet. And that's exactly where the second part comes in, the formation of the endosperm. You can think of the endosperm as a highly nutritious, packed lunch. It actively grows to support and nourish that developing embryo.
But how this resource inventory is actually managed depends entirely on the specific seed. We have endospermic seeds, which are kind of the hoarders. They retain a portion of their endosperm even after they are fully formed, keeping that nourishment locked away for when they eventually sprout. On the other hand, non-endospermic seeds consume their endosperm entirely during their initial development phase. They basically use up all their loot right away to build a much larger, stronger embryo before they even hit the ground.
And finally, Section 5, Advanced Agricultural Concepts, Cheat Codes Unlocked, because this is where things get truly wild.
Cheat code number 1 is artificial hybridization. Remember that VIP bouncer we talked about? That chemical dialogue that leaves pollination largely up to chance and strict natural compatibility? Well, here, human players step in and take direct control of the mechanics. Through careful intervention techniques, agriculturalists can manually select the pollen from one superior plant and physically brush it onto the pistil of another. We are essentially bypassing the random number generator of wind and insects to deliberately craft the ultimate high-yield, disease-resistant crops. It's pretty amazing.
Then we've got apomixis. And if you thought artificial hybridization was cool, get a load of this. Apomixis is the phenomenal biological process of producing seeds without any fertilization taking place at all. I mean, it is a literal magic hack. The plant effectively scups the entire double fertilization boss fight and just hands you the loot, a fully viable seed that is a perfect genetic clone of the mother plant. This allows highly desirable traits to be preserved flawlessly, generation after generation. And our final cheat code? Polyembryony. Simply put, this is your bonus multiplier. Instead of one single embryo developing after a fertilization event, you get multiple embryos packed within a single seed. Imagine opening a treasure chest and finding 3 or 4 times the reward inside. In agriculture, harnessing polyembryony means incredibly high propagation efficiency and a massive boost to our ability to cultivate very specific plant lineages.
Which leaves us with a final and honestly incredibly important question to think about. How could mastering these biological cheat codes permanently level up the future of global agriculture? We've traced this epic quest from the crafting of armored pollen grains to the strict gates of the pistil, all the way through to the creation of the seed itself. But by deeply understanding and manipulating mechanics like artificial hybridization, apomixis, and polyembryony, we aren't just observing the game of life anymore, are we? We're actively shaping it to feed a rapidly growing world. I want you to think about the massive implications of that as you go about your day. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. It's been a blast. And as always, keep learning.